back to the Early Weigh-In podcast, last episode of 2022. This week, we break down UFC Vegas 66, going down this Saturday back at the Apex. Our headliner is at middleweight between Jared Cannonier taking on Sean Strickland. And in the co-main event, one of the highest level fights you can make at 155 right now between Arman Tsarukyan and Damir Ismagulov. Could have very easily headlined this card. Total of 14 on the records for Saturday to end the year. I'm excited to break down these big fights, decide where there's some spots we think money to be made. We both, ended the year on an incredible fourth quarter. Have both finished in the green, profited 12 of our last 16 tracked events. Ended the year on a bang, man, and last week, again, profiting a couple units. Would have even been a little bit more if they gave that decision to Ankalaev, but 282 was a very, very good pay-per-view. Despite the only two times the judges being needed, screwing up. Ton of finishes, man. Great pay-per-view to end the year, and I thought our reads were on point for you to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm back in the hat this week, but again, it's the way that I want it to happen where we're both in the green. Taking a look at your card first, Chris Curtis was an underdog we both hit. I thought he looked awesome in there. We did exactly what he thought he was, going to have to survive that early storm and then picked his shots. You had one unit at plus 143 there to win you 1.43. And then another pick that I actually liked was the Billy Q over Alexander Hernandez. I think it's apparent that Hernandez does not have that dog in him, and Billy Q is the exact opposite. I think that was an excellent play at minus 160. I think the mess up is maybe the overexposure on Eric Silva. You had close to 2 units, and it was just a low-level fight in general. But not something that slowed down your night at all. You ended up the night plus 4.33 units, continuing that win streak. Moving over to my card, I'm going to say it, maybe my best read of the year so far, Ilia Topuria over Bryce Mitchell. It hurt me. It was a tough one to pick, but Ilia went in there and did the damn thing. Yeah. I think the most disappointing bet on my card was probably Darren Till, man. We both had him. Yeah. Him coming in with maybe an injury prior to the fight, but just the ACL tear, not being able to sprawl, he just did not look good. Even though he almost won that fight on a torn ACL, it was disappointing to say the least. I ended up the night plus 3.63 units, and let's knock it out, get one more positive night for us to end off the year. Our main event is in the middleweight division where we see Jared the Gorilla Cannonier taking on Sean Strickland. I think Sean has dealt with quite a bit of criticism after his last performance against Alex Pereira, the new middleweight champion, but I don't understand why people thought anything else was going to happen. Sean tells you exactly what he's going to do regardless of the opponent. That's to stand in the middle of the octagon with that cocksucker guard and look to throw hands. And truthfully, I think that's a pretty bold strategy here against Jared Cannonier on Saturday. Cannonier, he's coming into this fight off a loss to the former champ Israel Adesanya. And in that fight, Adesanya did Adesanya things, man. Jared really struggled dealing with the range and the movement and struggled to even get a round off of Adesanya. But here fighting Strickland, Jared will be dealing with far less movement and footwork, and I think it'll be much more catered to his style of fight. That being said, Jared, the first challenge Jared's going to have in the octagon on Saturday is the distance striking of Sean Strickland. For what it's worth, Sean does have a killer jab, and he uses it as a rangefinder, which can be very effective in keeping his opponents at the end of his punches. Where I think Jared could have success in the stand-up is the leg kicks. Sean has this tall man stance, and if Jared can hide those leg kicks when he's coming in off combinations, it could disrupt that forward movement of Strickland. It's not as much of a concern, but it definitely is worth mentioning that Sean's coming off of a knockout loss only 5 months ago. I think it's safe to say that Strickland right now against Cannonier, he's fighting probably the hardest puncher outside of Alex Pereira that he's ever fought in his UFC career. So that's got to be something that's on the back of his mind coming into this fight. I know both these guys have seen the judges a few more times in their careers than one would hope, but I do think that this is a matchup where they both have finishing potential. Jared, for obvious reasons, with his power punching, but Sean, much more of a collective damage over the course of the fight. And combined with that constant forward pressure, I do think that he could melt Cannonier if this goes later on into the fight. I think I'll be officially siding with Cannonier. I think he'll end up finding that button over the course of 5 rounds. I know he can carry that power into the later rounds, and Sean's ego, it does kind of allow for him to open up holes. And so It's either deciding between a squeaky clean performance from Sean or Jared just to touch him once. And coming off that KO loss, I do tend to side towards Jared here.
It's a real interesting fight. You talked about them both coming off losses to the champion and then, now or former champion and now champion. But I'm a bit more concerned on the side of Jared Cannonier, who's now 38 years old, and worked so hard to, get to the belt. Israel's like Jared's the next challenger. He goes out there and loses to Whitaker and then has to go win a couple more just to get to Israel. And like you said, real underwhelming performance. Couldn't even steal a round off of him. So, I do wonder about the motivation, the mindset here to climb the ranks again. For Strickland, I almost feel like he doesn't really give a shit about the belt. You talk about him, he's willing to go back in there with Pereira, strike the same way he said, just keep his right hand a little bit higher. And it's not what you like to see because I laid money on him versus Pereira, and it's just a guy who could have a strength and an advantage somewhere, but like Kevin Holland, just isn't going to take it. Almost lets the ego get in the way. For Cannonier, though, I don't know. Neither one of us have really ever been high on the guy. There's not really a lot of substance or skill set there either, but a lot of power. Known for used to being a heavyweight, now made his way down to middleweight, and if there is any, clinching, grappling going on, I feel like Sean, being an ex-welterweight, probably could see some disadvantages getting his back off the fence. But as far as all-out wrestling, I don't really see that being a factor in this fight whatsoever. You got Jared, who's landed one takedown in his last 9 fights, and if that's the game plan ever over 5 rounds for the first time, I don't really think I can trust the cardio there. But on the feet, you touched on the leg kicks. Sean struggled with those. I think the Brendan Allen fight early. And then as well a body kick. Sean's guard is already so fucking high with the cocksucking guard he's got. Body kicks, body work is going to drop those hands, so that Jared can land that power up top. For Strickland, though, I think I do favor his hands a little bit better, although there's not a whole lot else besides a jab and a right hand. I do think he's a cleaner striker of the two. No real offensive wrestling. I don't even think he's the best defensive wrestler. I think he's pretty lucky to have avoided the Brunsons and Vittori's of the middleweight division so far. I think the forward pressure of Sean, the constant in-your-face jab, volume, maybe some shit talk, and I think it's going to frustrate Jared a little bit and get him off his rhythm. As far as money line way, I think it's too close for me to have a money line bet on either side here. I'm going to be laying off the last main event of the year, but I'm going to side the other way. I am going to side with Strickland, probably by decision on FanDuel. That's plus 220. I think that's his win condition. Much rather be laying something on that than his money line. So I'm going to side with Strickland, but I'm not too confident. In the co-main event, we have Arman Tsarukyan taking on Damir Ismagulov. People's main event here, 100%, man. It is one of the absolute highest level fights I think the UFC made right now. This division has some absolute killers in it. And props to, both of these guys for fighting good competition right out the gates, taking these matchups and not trying to cherry pick their way through the lightweight division. For Arman, I truly think he's almost as talented as they come. You see everything you like to see in a fighter. Great Muay Thai, technical boxing, the left hook he lands on out, when they're closing distance on him. As clean as can be. The high kick that he has. And then his grappling. The scrambles with Gamrot, Islam, they're very high level. And then what he did to Joel Alvarez, the ground and pound, is just absolutely filthy. The one knock on Arman that I've always kind of had is the size a little bit. At 155 at only 5'7", he does carry a lot of muscle. We kind of saw over Gamrot, tends to fade a little bit. He's built kind of like Topuria a little bit to me. And I think with the right kind of diet, he's still only 26 years old. I don't really think 45 is out of the realm, and I think he could make a very good run there. In this matchup against Damir, although he's a little bit outsized and the size could get him in trouble, going to have significant speed advantage that I think he'll like. With Damir, it's not Islam and Gamrot, but still Thiago Moises, Guram Kutateladze. He's fought some pretty good names since coming over here as well. A lot of these guys you'll hear this week, the dark horse of the division, the skill set is there. He's got great size to go along with it. He just kind of lacks the finishing upside that, that Arman really has. He's still searching, I think, for the first UFC finish. It's more of the patient, surgical approach, stays out of danger, stays behind his jab, and it's going to take you a lot longer to climb through the division when you're just winning all these decisions here. Arman this week, he's having to come back from a loss that he might have probably kind of got robbed and taken out underneath him. I hear him kind of talking about the other lightweights in the division. I don't want him to think that this is just a regular old lightweight. I don't want him to overlook Damir here. I'm gonna side with Arman, but I do think at minus 200, we're getting a little bit wide. I think it's going to be a 29-28 decision. So I'm going to say the value is sitting on Damir. I think you got a pretty strong feeling on the other side, though.
Yeah, man, I will agree. I think it's safe to say both these guys will be at the top of the division for years to come. Damir at only 31 and Arman at 26. And I do feel like the general consensus for this fight is that it's going to be a close one and on the judges' scorecards. And while I agree the judges' scorecards have been an absolute travesty recently, I do not agree with this being a close fight. I think Damir does a really good job of winning, but never winning too much in his fights. You kind of talked about that. He does a good job sticking to the outside, choosing when to shoot for those takedowns to secure rounds. And as his level of competition has increased, he's not been able to rely on that takedown as often as we have seen in the past. And we saw that evidence of that in the Guram Kutateladze fight. I'm really having a hard time believing he's going to have any success grappling here against Arman. Arman's way stronger. I don't see Damir having success getting to the hips of Arman. In the stand-up, I do think it's fair to say Damir might have some early success keeping Arman at distance, circling off the cage. But that being said, Arman does a really good job of closing off the octagon and forcing these grappling exchanges or walking his opponents into the power shots that he throws. I think visually it'll be a lot of forward pressure from Arman along with the harder shots being landed by Arman. And I do think that there will be moments in the fight where Arman's able to find grappling success. Now, I do think that Damir's defensive grappling is good enough to where he's not going to be getting controlled for huge amounts of this fight. But I do think that Arman is a good enough wrestler to get him to the mat multiple times over the course of 15 minutes. If this was a 25-minute fight, I might have more concern for the cardio of Arman, but in a 3-rounder, I think he'll be much more aggressive with his wrestling attempts and is much more willing to give 100% the entire time as opposed to coming into this fight for a 5-rounder. I've got Arman by decision, but I would not be surprised if Damir gets caught on the feet by Arman and he's able to implement some of that ground and pound that we've seen in his previous fights that is finishing people. And ultimately, I am thinking that Arman gives Damir his first UFC loss. It was a difficult task picking a fight of the night for me, but this one is what I landed on. It's Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres taking on Juicy J Julian Erosa. We got two savvy veterans of the sport matched up against each other, with this being their 40th combined UFC fight. Erosa has clawed his way back into the UFC from coming up short on the Ultimate Fighter Season 22 to fighting back on the regional scene to get another call up, to going 0-3 in his first 3 fights back in the organization, to now being 6-1 in his last 7 and riding a 3-fight win streak. This guy never quits and is guaranteed to bring a fight for better or for worse. He's with 9 of his 13 UFC fights ending inside the distance. Bruce Leroy on somewhat of a career resurgence himself, although recently slowed down after his last fight with Sadiq Youssef. Caceres is 5-1 in his last 6, which is a huge switch up from his win some, lose some type of career up until this point. I think that this fight's going to take place primarily on the feet, with Juicy J being the aggressor and Leroy kind of using his footworks to skirt around the outside of the cage and pick his shots. I think Erosa could run into some problems early with the distance. Caceres is definitely a tough puzzle to figure out, but I do think as the fight progresses and Caceres starts to slow down, there will be plenty of opportunities for Erosa to bring some of his preferred chaos into the fight. Erosa has definitely been chinny his entire career, and even though his chin's held up in his last few fights, it's always a gamble on whether or not this night it's going to be able to hold up. I know he cuts a lot of weight to make 145, so it would be important for me to see him on the scale before I put any money on him. I do think that there's a possibility that Caceres catches him early, puts him away, and even though Caceres is Bruce Leroy, a primary striker, he's only got 3 KOs over 32 fights. And if he's not able to put Juicy J away early, I do pity the man on the opposite end of a rocked Erosa, because Erosa's going to throw the kitchen sink at you, which is why this is my fight to watch.
Man, very, very good fight like you talked about between savvy vets. Caceres quietly gotten up to 34 years old now. He's 26 fights deep into his UFC, and almost still looks like a 26-year-old out there, and you're like started to put things together lately. Won like 5 of his last 6 fights or something. Took that big step up against Saidyokub, but I thought he actually gave a damn good account of himself watching that back. I know I laid chalk on Saidyokub and sweated it to an extent. You go back and watch his fight with Choi, very impressive win. Talented, long, lanky grappler. He can wrap those long legs again around you, good at taking your back. And on the feet, he's a longer, faster striker. Will throw some unorthodox stuff at you. And early on, I think he's going to be really hard to track down, hit cleanly. I think it is a small cage, thankful for Julian, but I still think he's going to have a hard time landing clean on Caceres. The problem is I just don't think Caceres has any power to deter Julian's forward pressure whatsoever. And I think that's what's going to end up being, the issue for him, as Erosa's kind of found his groove as well. Big featherweight, likes to use that forward pressure. I think he holds the more powerful strikes of the two if anybody finishes each other on the feet. But I kind of see this one kind of going like the Woodson and Jourdain fight, where you kind of see Woodson and Jourdain up early on the strikes. They just don't have the stopping power to deter him in round 3 when he's made you use all that lateral movement and zapped your gas tank. He's going to start taking you down. He's landed two or more takedowns in all of these wins lately, except for like the 50-second finish over Nate Landwehr. I could see him winning minutes late in the fight with his grappling. It's a very close fight. I think it's a good one. I can't really say I like having money on either one of these guys. I don't really like having money on Leroy, and oh man, help you if you bet Julian Erosa as a big favorite, So I think Erosa has more weapons. I'm going to slide with him, or slightly lean with him as well. I think we got a killer fight on our hands. For my fight of the night, I took Said Nurmagomedov versus Saidyokub Kakhramonov here. I think it's another extremely fight, one that's tough to call. Originally, I was siding with Nurmagomedov, but for doing some research, man, I think pick'em line could be correct, man. For Nurmagomedov, he's a very talented striker, not the typical Nurmagomedov that you see. He's the one out here throwing unorthodox spinning attacks, a real kick variety arsenal. You don't really see him out here shooting double legs, locking up the Dagestani handcuff, nothing like that. He has shown me some dangerous, I guess, tools on the mat in a Stamen fight. Stamen shoots a takedown early and he locks up the guillotine, takes that fight early. But then in the Douglas de Silva De Andrade fight, I kind of saw the cardio take a dip after round 1, and I saw De Silva, win a round 2 off of him and kind of have some grappling success that I didn't really like. When I was going into tape study here with Kakhramonov, he makes it kind of hard for me to bet against him because, to me, he's kind of shown that he's got that dog in him twice and kind of willing to fight for your money, In his debut against Trevin Jones, he gets the call while he's in Uzbekistan, doesn't tell the UFC about it, flies over, like almost kills himself to make weight, still gets the late stoppage. And then, to kind of like, I guess, flip the script on Lonnie Lawrence, who was thought to have that big wrestling upside, and Kakhramonov goes out there and lands 10 takedowns on him. It was impressive to me. He's definitely not on the same level of striking as Said. The striking defense does worry me a ton, as I think Said's also the much faster striker of the two. But I think as the fight goes on, Kakhramonov, if he's still there, could make this a dirty fight, that he lands some of these takedowns. He is a public dog this week, which I always like being on the other side of, typically. And I am going to stay with my gut here. I'm going to go with Said Nurmagomedov to win a decision here. Won't have any action. Any thoughts on this fight?
I think, when you get a Nurmagomedov at pick'ems, it's always something that, catches your eyes like for sure.
He's hit at 80% or something.
Right, man. I mean, I don't know. I do think that I understand why the public dog is Saidyokub here. But with his loss to Pipe Vargas, it's not aging well. I know Pipe Vargas was kind of renowned as being one of the higher level regional scene guys, but as that's panned out, it's not that great. His win over Trevin Jones and Ronnie Lawrence, I think you kind of touched on both of those guys being maybe a little bit overhyped here. And I do think that this is a huge step up in competition against Said. And I think that this will probably be his second loss to a Nurmagomedov on his record. For my fighter to watch, I picked Cheyenne Vlismas. This was an easy pick for me for multiple reasons. One, she's kind of bad. Two, they do have her as a 2-1 favorite in the UFC while she's still looking for a staple win. And lastly, she's only a year removed from getting head and arm thrown 4 times by Bunny Ruiz. I do think that this will finally be her chance to get a win over someone with multiple UFC wins, and would honestly put to rest a lot of the concerns I have for her moving forward. At only 27 years old, she's bound to be making significant improvements on a fight-to-fight basis, but this is the first time that she's been matched up with a wrestler in the UFC. The head and arm throw, it was a weird attack, and maybe she just hadn't nailed down that defense for that specific technique. But now she's going to have to prove that she does have the tools to keep the fight standing and give her the best chance of winning. Corey McKenna, definitely not a world beater by any means, but she has picked up a solid 3-1 UFC record, with her only loss coming by split decision. And one of those wins coming over little monster Vanessa Demopoulos, who is on a 3-fight UFC win streak. McKenna has been able to score multiple takedowns in her last 3 UFC fights, and it'll surely be her best path to victory here against Cheyenne Blismus. Cheyenne does need to prove that she's not just a pretty face and actually has the skills to compete with legitimate UFC talent, which is why she's my fighter to watch.
She looks in great shape. Blismus does online this week, I could see this fight being a whole lot like the Elise Reed fight, and if she doesn't really press for that takedown early, I could see McKenna losing those minutes on the feet, but minus 200, I get it, stay off of that. Jake Matthews for my fighter to watch. This is his second fight back from his big layoff. This guy's still only 28 years old, and he's pretty much grown up in front of us in the UFC. He's fought some real tough guys like Sean Brady, Lee the Leech, and historically, prior to his last one, a whole lot of his fights involve a whole lot of grappling, whether it's him being on bottom or him being on top. And I think I see that as probably the clearest path to victory for him here against Samuelsberger. You watched the fight with Samuelsberger against AJ Fletcher, and if that guy had any type of gas tank, he was easily beating Samuelsberger, throwing him through the ringer in round 1. And so I like Jake Matthews on the mat, and also looks like he's turned a corner with the striking too. He hurt Jing Liang on the feet, and then the return against Andre Fialho, the striking looked on point. His hands looked much faster. He was always throwing in multiple punch combinations. I think he's got the superior gas tank of the two, and I can see this guy putting together winning minutes on the mat and in the striking. Matthews is going to be the pick. I've always tried to fade Samuelsberger in a whole lot of UFC's fights, but I am a bit of a concern here as I laid plus 140 on his comeback, minus 250 here. So curious to see if it's maybe just a bit of a market overcorrection, or if he goes out there and duplicates that performance. So Jake Matthews for fighter this week.
For my underdog of the card, a little bit difficult. I don't feel too strongly about this, but I do think that Bobby Green is a good underdog on this card. Green is one of these guys where throughout his entire career, he's always made fights close. Yep. I think that he has the counter wrestling that Dober's not going to be able to get him down any. And then on top of that, he has the cardio that he's going to push a pace from round 1 to the end of round 3, and I do think that Dober has shown in the past that his cardio is a problem. So if Green can continue that pace, I think there's opportunities for late finishes. I think there's opportunities for him to just get the better of the exchanges on the feet and win it in the eyes of the judges. So for me, Bobby Green is my underdog of the card, although I'm not probably playing him myself. Maybe if I dive a little bit more into it, or if I see something that I like over the course of the week, I might look towards it. But as of now, Bobby Green.
I really like that bet, man. He's going to fight for your dollar all the way probably to the judges' scorecard 9 times out of 10. My underdog, probably not going to necessarily agree with it, but I'm going to go with Damir Ismagulov. He was sitting at plus 159. I'm not going to go too in-depth. But I think the UFC kind of learned a little bit in that Gamrot fight that, hey, this is 2 elite high-level lightweights. Let's maybe not make someone a minus 250, minus 300 favorite here. A lot of us kind of disrespected Gamrot, and that fight played out a whole lot closer than we anticipated. And I can just kind of see that here. With Damir having that size advantage and already having a very sharp jab, I think it'll make it a little difficult for Arman to close the distance and get that wrestling, because I also think he's got really good counter wrestling, good takedown defense. But if Arman does find it, I don't necessarily think Damir's going to find extended periods of time stuck on the bottom either. I will reiterate, I'm going to side with Arman, but I do think it should be a little bit closer to a pick'em. I don't think Damir should be past like plus 130 in this spot, and his plus 225 decision prop, which is his real only path to victory, number 1 win condition. I think it's a little bit wide as well if you do want to tangle with an underdog this week. I think he has some value sitting on that money line.
For my prop bet, I'm going to be taking Jared Cannonier by TKO at plus 275. I think that Sean is going to be standing in the middle of the octagon there to be hit all 5 rounds. He's coming off of a KO loss. Sean has probably has way better volume striking, which I think could cause concerns for Jared Cannonier over the course of 25 minutes. And it might even get to the point where in these later 2 rounds, Cannonier's looking for that KO shot. That being said, Cannonier's shown that he can keep that power as the fight goes on. So I do think that his by TKO prop at plus 275, his main win condition, has quite a bit of value, which is why it's my prop of the week.
I definitely think that's his win condition because, like you said, probably get out volumed the later this does go. Prop for me, I'm going to go with Manel Kape versus David Dvorak over 2.5 minus 145. Over is not something I typically hit, but buried on the prelims is this very, very good fight here. And I think minus 145 is already an easy price to play for flyweights sometimes, and especially when you have like elite level flyweights here. I think they both will struggle as they climb the division with their defensive wrestling. I think a good wrestler will cause them both issues, but I don't think there's any grappling involved in this fight. I think it's going to be a very close striking battle on the feet. Both guys are counter strikers first. Neither one of them are typically leading the dance with a ton of volume. Neither one of them typically putting themselves in danger. And, Manel Kape, until his last 2, you see him take like all of round 1 off to download that information and get those reads. And you look historically, both of them are extremely durable as well. They've both only been finished 1 time throughout their entire pro careers. And while Kape, with the speed advantage, is probably the one with the finishing upside, he's coming off 2, first-round finishes. But I truly think this fight sees a scorecard 65-70% of the time here. So I'm going to take it over 2.5 at minus 145 with Kape and Dvorak.
Moving on to our best bet section, I'm going to be going with my only bet as my best bet, and that's Arman's money line. I've already touched on it a little bit, but I do think that Arman's going to have all of the moments in the fight. I think that he's going to be the one pushing forward. I think he's going to be the one initiating the grappling and actually having some success. And then when it's on the feet, I think that the more powerful shots are going to be landed by Arman. If this was a longer fight, I'd have a little bit more concerned about Arman gassing, with Damir being so comfortable in long 5-round fights. But it's not. So I do think that Arman will easily take at least 2 of these rounds, but I'm kind of looking at it as a 30-27 for Arman. Whether it's with the judges or Arman trying to come back and get that crappy robbery, whatever decision loss that he had over Mateusz Gamrot, and he wants to come in here, show that he can get a finish, not leave it up to the judges. I do think that Arman's the side here, so he is my best bet.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean about having the more winning moments, the ones that sway the judges. That's definitely going to be on the side of Arman. Best bet for myself, I'm going to steal 2 guys here, was, I talk about it in quick pick section. This is my only pick, only locked play I had in for the week until today as well. I'm going to take a parlay of Sergey Morozov and Amir Albazi. Got in on it last week, and I think both of these guys some of the best chances of winning on Saturday. And I really like the back guys where I think there's significant advantages on the mat, and that's what I see here with Morozov. I know he did screw you against Douglas De Andrade, but, he almost finished De Andrade in round 1 and then just kind of blew the wad. And hopefully he learns from that if it ever happens again. But Journey Newsom was, I think, a step down from a lot of the guys Morozov's been fighting. I think he's faster on the feet, more versatile striker, and the absolute ability to take Journey Newsom down and neutralize them. And then pretty much the same with Albazi, who I think is one of the better flyweights on the roster right now. Was supposed to be fighting Brandon Royval in a big fight here, and now getting Costa stepping up on short notice, who's coming off the Contender Series. And the guy's young. I think he is. I think there's winnable fights on the UFC roster for him. I don't think this is one here. I think Albazi's just got the much better wrestling, world-class jiu-jitsu. Should probably have success taking this guy down. Probably eventually find the sub, but I'm not counting out him just dominating, kind of like the Master Z fight, just dominating with the grappling over 3 rounds. So both guys here, I think, have clear advantages to win. Sergey Morozov, Amir Albazi parlay for my best bet.
Moving on to our quick pick section of the podcast, we start off the night in the bantamweight division where we see Sergey Morozov taking on Journey Newsom. I have flashbacks when I even think about Morozov, but I do think that he should get this dub here.
Yeah, I think Morozov's a clear side here. Part of my parlay. Taking on David Dvorak and Manel Kopp in men's flyweight. I think it's a tough fight that goes the distance, but I think Manel Kopp is a legit talent when he's on his A game. I'm going to go Manel Kopp by decision.
Yeah, there's very few people in the flyweight division that I think could beat Manel Kopp. I'm pretty high on him as well, so I'm going with Kopp as well. Moving on to the welterweight division, Brian Battle versus Rinat Fakhretdinov. I haven't looked into this fight. The long surname in Fakhretdinov, it does make me want to go towards him. Brian Battle, I know that he's got that dog in him, so I don't like fading him, but I am going to side with Fakhretdinov here just off of initial look and pick.
Yeah, man. Battle is making 170 on short notice. I think he's at an experience disadvantage with Rinat having double his fights. I think he's at a ground disadvantage. You see moments where Tresean Gore is getting this guy down, and I told you I was one of that bet that I've been staring out all week that I haven't placed yet on Fakhretdinov, almost like Rosenstruik last week, and I feel like when I don't play this one, it's going to bite me, but I'm going Fakhretdinov as well. Moving up, 55, Maheshete taking on Rafa Garcia. This is the other bet I have locked in today. I do have one unit on Rafa Garcia's money line. I like him to take this guy, take him down, put him through the ringer through 3 rounds on the mat.
I don't know. Garcia's going to have to prove it to me. I'm a fan of Maheshete. I'm going to side with Maheshete here. Moving on to the bantamweight division, Said Nurmagomedov taking on Saidyokub Kakhramonov. I think that this is a steal as far as Said Nurmagomedov's price tag. I'm looking into the fight a little bit more before I make a play, but I am on the Nurmagomedov side.
That's what my gut tells me as well, man. So might dig into it even more, and if you pull the trigger, might get me too as well. Julian Marquez taking on Deron Winn at 185. Deron Winn probably 195, not 185. He never makes weight and can't have the cardio to wrestle. But Julian Marquez can't wrestle either. I don't know. I'm going to go Marquez. I think he gets the job done. And let's go round 3 again.
Yeah, I also think Marquez. I can't trust somebody who punches up. Win just doesn't do it for me. I don't think that that's his weight class, and I think he'd have to make some real big life changes to get UFC wins. Moving forward, we go to the welterweight division where Jake Matthews takes on Matt Semmelsberger. I'm on the Jake Matthews train here. I think his price tag's a little too much for my liking, but I am on Matthews here.
Yeah, it's too much for my liking after playing plus 140 last time, but he might cover it. I really do like Jake Matthews to win this fight wherever it goes. Cheyenne Vlismas taking on Corey McKenna. Both girls 7-2 record here. Vlismas to me, I don't know, man. I think she might have more ways to win the fight, but McKenna has like the clearest way that she can win it, So it's a complete stay away. I'm gonna side with Cheyenne Vlismas. It's a sketchy one.
Vlismas was my fighter to watch, but I think McKenna is actually who I'm going to side with here. I think she has the wrestling upside, and until Vlismas can prove to me that she's patched those holes, I'm not believing it. Moving on to the middleweight division, Cody Brundage taking on Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. I've tried to fade Oleksiejczuk multiple times now in the UFC, and it's not working out for me. I do think that he has the slight edge here, and most anywhere he probably will have to, fight off a couple of takedown attempts from Brundage, but I am going to side with Mikhail here.
Yeah, I think he's at 185 where he should have been all along, I don't think he has a tough weight cut to get down here. I don't think he just wanted to cut weight at all at 205, but I think he holds one of the clearest advantages on anybody on the card in the stand-up. His hands are lightning quick, the way he sets up his left hands. I think he puts Cody Brundage away in round 1 very, very easily. Let's go on to Drew Dober taking on Bobby Green. Close fight, man. Close fight. Bobby Green, notorious for making it close on the scorecards. But I think in the first 2 rounds, we're going to see Drew Dober do enough to win it on the judges' scorecards. I'm going to side with Drew Dober.
I'm going to go with Bobby Green here. I think he's durable enough to withstand Drew Dober's all out pace. And I think Dober is subject to have a cardio problem as the fight goes on. So I'm going to go Bobby Green here, either late or winning it 2-1. Moving on to the featherweight division, Bruce Leroy Caceres taking on Juicy J Erosa. I think this could be a really, really tough fight for Erosa, and him sitting at a favorite price tag sketches me out. Yeah. I think it's a coin flip fight, and if this fight stays on the feet, I think Caceres is a better striker. So I'm going to go Caceres here.
I'm going to lean the other way in Erosa, but I'm 100% with you on this fight. Is a lot closer. Don't lay whatever minus something on Julian Erosa. Amir Albazi taking on Alessandro Costa. Again, I think Costa, he's a legit talent, but I think he's just bit off a little bit more than he can chew here in his debut. I like Amir Albazi. Submission decision. Probably 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know much about Costa, but this is a big ask for his debut, so I'll also lean Amir Albazi here. In the co-main event at 155, Arman Tsarukyan taking on Damir Ismagulov. Arman Tsarukyan's my guy. I'm going with him.
I told you where the value is, but this part's about who I think is going to win the fight, and I'm going to side with Arman Tsarukyan with you as well, man. Last main event, 2022, we got Jared Cannonier squaring off Sean Strickland at middleweight, and I think we're going to go out on a disagreement. I'm going to take Sean Strickland here.
We are going out on a disagreement. I've got Jared Cannonier here. I think he'll find the chin over 25 minutes, and Sean's going to give him that opportunity.
Well, man, 14 fights for us on Saturday. Great weekend of fights. Hopefully produce as much finishes as last week did. Don't need those judges again. But I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next year.
Peace.